Simon, thanks for joining us. Middle of the
No
international
problem.
break. How are you keeping?
Not too bad, thanks. Yeah, busy doing a bit of England under 21 stuff and a bit of Sheffield today as well as Newcastle. So it's been okay. We welcome the football coming back though.
Indeed, I'm not a big fan of the international break. I didn't watch England against Belgium, so I escaped that travesty. I'm not sure how they played, but anyway, we'll move on from that, and we're going to talk about Newcastle, and just have a little look really at the season so far. You know, they're 13th, 11 points. Just your summing up of what you've seen so far this season.
Well, it's been reasonable, hasn't it? I think the pre-season was decent in that the signings were good. They spent a bit of money and did decent deals to get Callum Wilson in and Fraser especially. Um, and so everyone was a little bit enthusiastic then and thinking this could be half decent. I think the aim is still probably getting in the top 10 if that's possible. Debatable whether it is possible. So the season's it's just been okay. Like a lot of things about Newcastle recently, you can't get too enthused by it. There are points of concern, there are points of encouragement, but fairly par for the course.
When Steve Bruce is asked about formation and tactics and style play, and he comes back, which he has done quite often with the words "it's a work in progress," what's your take on that? Because a lot of fans say, well, you've been here, not a while is maybe a stretch too far, but you've been here enough to maybe see it more than a work in progress. What is your take when he does come back with that, when he is questioned about how it's going on the pitch?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a work in progress. The because he keeps changing formations between a back four and a back five. So in terms of that definition, it's a work in progress. However, Bruce has been there a season and a bit now, and you might argue that there comes a point where there should be a settled plan and a settled formation, and everyone knowing where they fit in that. However, I think he's found, a little bit like Rafa found before him, that it's quite hard with the centre backs they've got to trust the back four. It can be a bit leaky. So he's gone back recently, which has been heavily debated, to a back five. I think the feeling has been, the past manager and this manager, is that if they maybe lack a bit of pace at the back, and it needs shoring up with three centre backs, and they can release wing backs from that. And so he's gone back to that. It's not Bruce's natural formation. It's the formation that he tells us he wants to get to a back four and have more in midfield and offer more up front. So it is a work in progress, but there comes a point where he needs to say, it's certainly 2 years in, that he's got the players he wants, he's filled the gaps and the weaknesses, and he's on a back four and then building from there, and in a bit more of an attacking style.
Do you think, is it a case that Steve Bruce maybe now just needs to stick to what he wants to do, or do you kind of maybe support in some way adapting to whoever you're playing, because he hasn't got the players to stick to a certain formation against every side? But at the same time, as he keeps changing and chopping his formation and his style, it is maybe affecting the long-term aim of what he's trying to achieve.
Yeah, you can see what he's trying to do, and the previous manager did it as well. That if you've got weaknesses, you try and plug them, and Newcastle aren't a top 6 team, or top 8 team even, which is everyone wants them to be. Therefore, they're not going into games being it, or Steve Bruce doesn't think they can go into games imposing themselves on teams and thinking, this is our style and we're going to play that and we're going to beat this team and that style is going to work. It's very much a reactive thing at the moment, and it has been for years. For several seasons, it's been, you're playing a top 4 team. Wow, we're not going to have the ball. We're going to have to set up the formation, which means that we're not going to have the ball and we're going to keep it tight and stay in the game. And that's been the frustration for Newcastle fans. I think that's been for several years now since they got promoted, has been the adaptation that the coaches have done. Whereas I think fans are a little bit frustrated it's not moved on quicker after the relegation, rebuilding after the relegation, to fashion a team which says, this is the way we play, this is how we're going to attack. The other team will be on the pitch and we're going to have to react to them and defend and have a formation for that, but we can go for this game. And I think I think the biggest frustration with Newcastle fans now is that Newcastle aren't necessarily imposing themselves in certain games, and it seems to be a kind of reactive formation to kill off the other team or stay in the game. It comes across as a little bit timid, reactive, and negative, really. Now, the debate now is the centre of debate about Newcastle United is have Newcastle got the players and the team to say, we're playing like this, we'll give a team a good battle, win or lose, this is how we do it, and we're going to attack, which I think a lot of people want, and a pragmatic coach's point of view, which is saying we're going to have to adapt our formation and take into consideration the talent on the other teams. My argument would be it needs it should experiment by loosening it up a bit more and imposing themselves on a game more, because this season, more than any, there's going to be fatigue, there's going to be crazy results, there's going to be teams going up and down in their performance levels because of the number of games and the demands on the players. And Newcastle, with not that many internationals, could maybe bed down a formation that says, we're more than a team that reacts to others.
Well, that was going to be my question. The frustration over not imposing themselves on games. When you look around and you see Aston Villa doing it, and yes, they got beat a couple of weeks ago, but they've had a very good start this season. Would you argue that they've got a better squad than Newcastle? And if not, because I think a lot of the frustration is fans are seeing teams who maybe they think are on their level impose themselves against the so-called top six, and actually the results are coming up in their favour. Whereas you look at maybe against Southampton, for example, Newcastle just, I don't want to say the word surrendered because that might be a bit harsh, but it wasn't pretty, and they didn't really attack the game in a way that I think fans were expecting them to. And you saw against Manchester United, once they took the lead early on, they sat back and allowed Man United to come at them. Whereas other teams around them, maybe have adapted to the situation we're in, no fans, crazy results. So can you understand the fans' frustration when they look at other teams like Aston Villa and seeing what they're doing?
I can. And there's a lot of teams in the middle rank of the Premier League, just below, say, the top 6, 7, who are giving it a go and have got to seem to have a plan. I mean, Southampton have turned themselves around. You mentioned them just in a year. They lost 9-0 at home, and almost a year to the day they hammer Newcastle. So you can turn it around quickly if there's a tactical way of playing and you've got the players to do it. So I do understand the frustration. I think if Newcastle are kind of a mid-table team, which they are, and they're doing okay, and it's not really spectacular, but it's not disastrous, that's something. But I think if you're going to survive and enthuse people with that, and make the argument, well, we're in the Premier League, this is a long-term building process, I think you've got to have something in attack, which means you might score 2, 3, 4 goals in a game, and you might have your bad games as well. But if you've got the potential to unleash a bit of excitement and some thrills, which has been lacking at Newcastle, I think you can get away with being mid-table and shoring it up now and then in defence. So because that's always been the tradition at Newcastle for 20, 30 years since Keegan came back, that they gave thrills and spills. They might never, they're not going to win anything. They're not going to, they don't win cups or anything. But if they can have the odd game where they have an amazing comeback or a daft result. Now, daft results don't really seem to happen with Newcastle recently. It's all a bit predictable. So I think that sort of kind of magic unpredictability, if Bruce could bring that back, or the attack could bring that back a bit more, it might kind of lift people a bit.
I've seen accusations of a defeatist attitude with the Newcastle, like the setup, and if they get anything from a game against the so-called top 6, it's a bonus. But again, when you consider how the season's gone and you look at results, and we'll focus on that Manchester United result, for example, they came in on the back of a horrible run of form. Harry Maguire was all over the place. Newcastle took the lead, and yeah, it seemed like they were a bit shocked, and afterwards it was all about, oh well, we have to realise we're playing Manchester United, and maybe, I mean, the words weren't we should expect to get beat, but it was along the lines of and kind of realise our place, so to speak. And that is frustrating, I think, as a fan, to hear that, especially given how Man United came in. And do you think that is a fair accusation of Newcastle? Is that something that you see running through the team, or is that one result and the reaction was a bit overhyped to it?
I think they. I mean, I was at the game, the Man U game, and I don't think the result looked really bad in the end. I don't think the performance was as disastrous as was made out, and the reaction on social media from some fans. I mean, they were in the game until the 87th minute. It's just they collapsed after that, and whether he got the subs right or whatever, it was 1-1 against Man United, and that was a decent result. Just Man U, Bruno Fernandes, Rashford turned the afterburners on and murdered them in the last 6 minutes of an injury time. So it was a bad result. But yeah, I know what you mean. I understand, because fans react to kind of the mood and the language being used by manager and players. And I think Bruce is really cautious not to show the opposition respect, and not to overhype his own team, because he probably doesn't think it's worth overhyping. But there's not a punchiness, there's not a we're going to punch above our weight kind of attitude coming from Newcastle. It's kind of middle of the road, and yeah, it does seem defeatist at times. Not defeatist, because I don't think that group of players are defeatist. I think they want to do well, but I do think they could be freed up in the language that's used to say, look, we're Newcastle United. We should we should match Man City. We are on a day we can beat anyone. On a day we can score goals against anyone. We've got 3 or 4 wildcard players who are really decent attackers who can turn on the magic, and emphasise a bit of that positivity a little bit more, instead of looking at how you shut down another team, or how respectful you've got to be to the other team. I do think as a collective group, from the manager down, they've got to think, right, we've got players in our team who can turn it on. Callum Wilson can score goals. Almiron is not a defensive midfielder in the middle. He should be up there buzzing around the edge of the box. Saint-Maximin can win a game for you in 2 brilliant moments. Why not emphasise that and say, and let's get these players at their max to turn games, rather than being a bit defeatist and worried about the other side. Obviously, in the training ground, he's going to do his tactics and be really worried about Man City and De Bruyne and all that. Obviously, you're going to do that, but the talk should be a little bit more about Newcastle punching above its weight and getting the most out of that squad.
You mentioned there the wild card players, and a lot of debate has been about Almiron and Saint-Maximin. Let's concentrate on Saint-Maximin first of all, playing in a more central kind of free role, number 10. And he has said, he would like to play that. But for a lot of fans, it isn't working. So what is your opinion on that role that he's in? And does Steve Bruce at some point, and maybe soon, have to just take him aside and say, look, we've tried it, it's not working. I know that might be your preference, but you're much more effective kind of on the wing, and just actually, be the boss and say, look, it's not working. We have to change it, because when Saint-Maximin isn't on his game, and it's arguable that the last 3 or 4 games he hasn't been, Newcastle are a much worse side.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very true. I mean, it's strange though. We always look when a player's earned his contract and he's been hungry, earning a new contract, massive wage rise, which Saint-Maximin clearly had earned with his performances over the last year. And it does seem that his performances have dipped, and that's not a lack of hunger. It could be coincidence. It could be his change of position to number 10. But last few games, he's not been on it. He's not been, and whether that could be circumstances of a game, but he needs to get angry again and get hungry and make sure that he's the outlet. And now teams will be working Newcastle out and singling him as the danger man, and he'll get extra attention, and there'll be tactical plans designed to stop him getting the ball from the opposition. So all that's got to be overcome. But Saint-Maximin's got to show a bit of aggression now and really go on to another level to £2.5 million a year, whatever he's earning now. He clearly wants to be a really top player in European football, and he knows all about European football, and he loves the game and he loves training. Steve Bruce has spoken about this, how much you can ask him about a player from anywhere in the leagues in Europe, and Saint-Maximin can tell you about him. So he knows his stuff. And that kind of ambition's got to start coming over. Now he's got his new deal. And yeah, if he wants to play number 10, great. But he might not get as much room there than he does when he's breaking out wide. So he's got to be used better, and he's used best when he picks up the ball, has a fullback in front of him, and can skin him, and then put the devastating ball in. Quite often he's beaten someone, then tried to beat them again, and he's done a bit too much on the ball. He could be lethal if he starts to just beat his man and do the killer pass or shot. So yeah, they need to get more out of him, undoubtedly. Number 10 when he's playing number 10, it means he can go right or left. So it should be like a role which gives him a lot of freedom. But I think he was playing in a sort of a three. There was Callum Wilson up front, and then Saint-Maximin playing just behind. If there was 3 attackers and then Callum Wilson and Saint-Maximin was the number 1, but it was the number 10 behind that might help if he's got 2 wide men around him to release. But it is a conundrum for Steve Bruce, and one that they've got to solve quick, because they need like someone approaching 10 goals from Saint-Maximin this year.
Because I mean, it's not just Saint-Maximin, because if he changes that, then there's the Almiron question, Jeff Hendrick. There's so many questions that Steve Bruce is facing in this international break for this Chelsea game. Almiron, you've mentioned, obviously not a defensive midfielder, but that is where he's being deployed at the moment. He showed against Argentina the kind of performance he can put in when he's pushed up a bit. Do you think Steve Bruce is gonna change? Obviously, Almiron's had the yellow card, so he'll hopefully be back a lot sooner than anticipated from the international games. So probably will be in line for some involvement against Chelsea. Do you think if he is, Steve Bruce will change it and maybe push Almiron a bit further forward, and then the whole system will have to change?
Yeah. I mean, Almiron should be in the team in an attacking role, every time. He's that. The Premier League is so based on pace now, and Almiron has got it in abundance. That he should be in the team, and he's not. He's also one of those players who's not scared to work back. So you'll see him scurrying back into the left back position to help Jamal Lewis out. So he's not just like a luxury player. He will do the whole package. However, it's the attacking end where you need. I mean, I don't know how many goals he's got. I haven't looked it up, but he needs to score more goals and get more key passes, assists, etc. And it looks like he's like on fast forward all the time. So there's no change of pace. He needs to sometimes slow it down to then be able to use his pace. Whereas at the moment it's like almost headless chicken stuff, where he's just belting at full pace, and then hasn't got the composure or the positioning to make the killer pass or shot. So I think somehow he needs to slow his game down and then use his pace at the right time. And yeah, look, I'm sure there's staff at Newcastle looking at the Argentina game where he allegedly did well and seeing how that worked. He's probably competing with Ryan Fraser for that left of the front 3 behind Wilson position. But can he play on the right as well? I mean, you'd think that. I mean, my ideal front 4 would be Wilson up front, and in the line of 3 just behind that would be Fraser on the left, Saint-Maximin and Almiron vying for number 10 on the right. So that's kind of the front 4 that you would see being productive and hopefully settling down. But yeah, I mean, they need to get more out of Almiron. But he's been here a while now, so is it 2 years now? So you do wonder how much he can move on and how quickly he's learning, and he's got to learn a bit quicker as to what is effective in the Premier League.
4 Premier League goals thus far, and obviously that was one of the criticisms, that he wasn't scoring enough. But I think we're lucky enough to be there, or we were before lockdown. You're back in now, but you watched the whole game, whereas you saw pundits, and we're going to get onto pundits in a minute, and certain pundits were having a massive go at Almiron, but it just struck me that the pundits weren't watching the full game. Yes, you can say no assists, but when you watch the passage of play from last season, he was starting the passage of play, or he was having a role in it. He might have not got the assist, but he was still playing a crucial part, and that's sometimes what he does. He might not get the stats, but he does play a crucial role when he's on top of his game.
Yeah, he's a bit like, he's kind of a ball. I remember Gutierrez, when Gutierrez was in the side, and he always worked so hard down the left. He was helping his left back out, but he was the ball carrier, which relieved the pressure on Newcastle in that era. But his criticism of Gutierrez was he didn't get the goals, he didn't get the assists, but he was still an absolutely key member of the team because of that ball carrying. And you're right to say, like, just outside Newcastle's own penalty area, he would get the ball and be off with it. And it's very, very similar to Almiron, in that he can find a pass to pass through that area and start a move. And that's an important part of the game as well. When you're pinned into your own box, and can you just ping a couple of quick passes and beat your man and get away? And he does that really well. So yeah, when you got to watch the start of moves, and you're right that he does start a lot of attacks and get up in support of them as well. And he'd be on that team sheet all the time. I think he really should, get him back from South America quick and get it drilled for the weekend, ahead of Chelsea, because that kind of breakaway is, as all coaches know, when you're on the attack and then a team can hit you quickly going the other way, that's when teams are vulnerable, and you can get 3-on-3 or 4-on-4 in attack, and it's not, there's room in there for pace. So that's what Newcastle have got to get working, really.
We mentioned there Almiron on the kind of the edge of the box, and obviously he was at fault for one of the goals against Southampton. Don't want to focus on that mistake, but as a whole, what did you make of Steve Bruce's decisions against Southampton? Because he came out and he said from 6 minutes it wasn't working. Fabian Schär mentioned a similar thing as well, and fans were saying, well, why didn't Steve Bruce change it early on? He didn't change it at half time. Why didn't he stop the passing it around the back? Because that was just inviting Southampton to press, which they're really good at. Did you think he made the wrong decision? Did he first of all set up wrong against Southampton, and then once he saw it going so badly so early on, should he have changed the approach?
Well, there are kind of like tiny margins, aren't there? And Southampton were on a roll, and they wanted to get to the top of the Premier League, and it was you kind of sensed before the game this is going to be their night. When you look at, when I talk about fine margins, it's two individual mistakes: Longstaff tripping over the ball, getting robbed on the edge of the box, and the same with Almiron. So if it wasn't for that, they could have had a 0-0, and they could have, but it wasn't an attacking performance, and it wasn't an imposing performance again. And Ward-Prowse was just awesome that night. He was literally everywhere, and the legs that he had in midfield, Newcastle couldn't match. And I've never realised he had that kind of performance. That midfielder, I've seen him at the under-21 level, and never thought he had that kind of performance in him. But he is superb for Southampton. And if Sean Longstaff's looking how he can progress in the game from being from a good start in the last couple of years, if he can get fitter and quicker and cover as much ground as he can, which he is a bit of an athlete, but he hasn't got that quite turn of pace yet. Ward-Prowse is a good example for Longstaff in that game to see what's required to really lead a team from central midfield. I mean, could Bruce have changed it? It was a tight game, and they didn't get forward enough, and they didn't create enough, and that was because Southampton swarmed all over them at the back, and Newcastle had a plan to pass through that, and it messed up a couple of times, and it cost them. Newcastle, you could see Saint-Maximin trying to get. We talk about pressing all the time in the game now. It's a bit of a buzzword, but Newcastle tried to get that going, and you could see two of them do it, and then Saint-Maximin waving his hands to get a third man blocking off and a fourth man blocking off, which is how a press works. Once there's one weakness in it, and there's a couple of players free for the pass, then you're knackered. So Newcastle didn't do that. Didn't do it well enough at the other end to put Southampton under pressure.
Mentioned it was a tight game, but we've seen as well in several games this season, Carl Darlow is just stopping the score sheet from looking rather embarrassing. I think they've conceded the most shots on goal this season. Haven't got the stats to hand, but it's not pretty. I know Sky flashed up the graphic halfway through the Southampton game, so they'd have to add on quite a few more shots, given what happened after that. But that's not a good thing at all. I mean, look, Carl Darlow, brilliant so far. It's going to be interesting when Martin Dubravka comes back, how Steve Bruce going to play it. But at the same time, you don't want your keeper being that busy. And do you think that luck's going to run out eventually? They're going to end up losing 4 or 5-0 at some point?
Yeah, they probably will. But I have to say, Carl Darlow's been brilliant. I mean, he's not really done much wrong when he's been called up by Newcastle. They're quite lucky to have a so-called reserve keeper, if that's what he still is, who's that good. He's a good shot stopper. He's been really good claiming stuff in the air as well. And it's probably Newcastle are a really good team to be the goalkeeper for, because you get plenty of action, your confidence rises, you stop a few, and you look good. But yeah, you count up the number of shots that Newcastle are conceding, and it is bad. And Bruce knows that. They've looked at that. They said a couple of press conferences ago that they were aware of it, and they wanted to shut that down a bit more, which needs energy in the centre of midfield to do so. So there are various multi-pronged problems that all link in. Have they got the energy to stop the shots and the focus and the nimbleness and the pace to do that? And then have they got the pace and the reactivity to then be piling forward to catch teams on the break? I mean, it's the kind of, you need a good player good players in the centre of midfield to be able to do both. And that's what they're looking for, a little bit more from everybody. But Darlow's been great. You're right to mention what a problem Steve Bruce is going to have when Dubravka's fit. Dubravka's a brilliant keeper. He wants to be playing in the first team for the summer, so he's part of it in the summer for his international team for the Euros. But you do say, like, managers generally don't drop a second choice keeper if he's playing well. They wait for the first clanger and then they're out. Or they change it in the cups. So the FA Cup will come and Dubravka will play. So Dubravka's probably going to be sitting on the sidelines for a few weeks, just making sure he's 100% fit, building his body up before he gets back ahead of Carl Darlow, if he gets back. But it's good competition.
It's a nice dilemma to have. And I guess when things are going well at Newcastle as well and everyone's fit, there's quite a few of them dilemmas on the pitch. But unfortunately, when results don't go Newcastle's way and people don't have good games, and obviously negativity rises. And you mentioned there the midfield, and we're going to focus on Jeff Hendrick. You know, when he signed, it wasn't one that people were overly excited about, but I think a lot of people kind of understood he had that Premier League experience. He could just go about doing the kind of maybe the jobs that don't really get noticed. But the past few weeks, he's not had a good time for Newcastle or for the Republic of Ireland. He got sent off in their last game. You know, Roy Keane had a go at him for what happened against England earlier in the international break. What have you made of Jeff Hendrick's time on Tyneside so far?
Well, you're right. It wasn't like a signing that enthused you, or it didn't enthuse me. It probably, I don't know. I feel bad saying this because he's going to be a million times better footballer than we are as people who talk about it play. And if you ever got near him on a football, you wouldn't get near him on a football pitch because you wouldn't be able to tackle him. But we're talking about Premier League level, and it's kind of, for me, he's a bit of like he's a kind of a fill the hole player, and like, yeah, he's there. And he scored that. He obviously got a header against West Ham, or tap-in against West Ham opening game, which relieved the pressure a bit. It was good. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he's a bit like, I don't know. He's not quite as energetic and destructive as Isaac Hayden, but he's also not as creative. Doesn't seem to be as creative as Shelvey. So he's kind of he's caught between a few stools, and people are working out what he does. He's an anchor. I suppose he's an anchor man for midfield. In terms of he shuts down people, and he'll give simple balls to the more exciting players. But so he's not like he's kind of a squad filler, and he was free. He wanted to play centrally. I think that's why Bruce said he would play centrally rather than a bit on the right. He's played on the right for Burnley, which frustrated him a bit. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want him to become like like a hate figure or a figure who everyone just turns on because it's not his fault that Newcastle are just kind of mediocre. He's just part of it, and he's signed and probably got a very good deal to sign as a free agent. But yeah, you did think, well, I hope this signing doesn't like impede the progress of Sean Longstaff. Longstaff's not the finished article, and he's got his faults, but I'd like to see him alongside Hayden, or even him in the number 10 role sometimes, because he played it against Bournemouth, I think, end of last season after the lockdown. Played it really well. I think they can get a lot out of him. And Henrik's there as a kind of a backup when there's injuries. He's not going to change. I don't think he's going to change games. I don't think he's going to score much. And then you've got John Joe Shelvey when he gets fit to come back, and Hayden. And if they play a two at the back, two holding with Hayden and Shelvey, then it will be Hayden and Shelvey. If they're playing three at the back, you'd probably bring Longstaff in, and I think probably Hendrick might be fourth choice even. But Bruce is being loyal to him because he signed him in the summer and he's obviously made him promises to get him. So
that was going to be my next question. It'd be interesting to know what he was promised in the summer because, when Shelvey got injured, it was a good chance for him to stake his claim in that central midfield role and make it really difficult for when Shelvey does return, or as Sean Longstaff was working back from the illness he had. And obviously Hayden was out as well. But now Hayden's back, Longstaff's working towards that full match fitness.
Yeah.
I mean, surely against Chelsea, I've asked Lee Ryder this. He said he'd like to see the Longstaff with us in the middle. Mark Douglas said Hayden and Sean Longstaff. Who would you put up against Chelsea?
I would play Hayden because he's the one with the legs and the energy and the destructiveness. And I would play, Shelvey's not there yet. I don't think so. So you'd play Sean Longstaff. I would play them as the anchor too, because they're both energetic and, can do that kind of destructive, simple job in midfield to shield the defence. And then you unleash your back four with those two shielding, and then a front three that's quite attacking. Is Fraser fit? I don't know. On Almiron and Saint-Maximin, and then Callum Wilson up front, and then you'd be looking at that kind of thing. Though that's the risk that Steve Bruce is calculating. Does he play a back four, a holding two, and then a three attackers with Wilson up front? Will he do that against Chelsea? I don't know. He might match them up with a back five again. It's a tough decision.
If he does go back to a back four, Jacob Murphy out and one of the actual right backs in, what have you made of his emergence? Because I think everyone was quite excited to see Jacob Murphy given the chance, and he performed so well in that wing back role initially. He was exposed quite a few times against Southampton, and then people were kind of saying, well, it's a bit strange. Actually, you've got Manquillo, Kraft, Yedlin, all there, and yet it's Jacob Murphy playing in that role. What have you made of his emergence and the decision to actually play him as a right wing back?
Well, I thought it was a brave decision to play him wing back, but he did really well at Wolves, you have to say. And I think if you're going to play a back five, he can be a wing back, but then so can Manquillo. So Kraft, a much more defensive minded right back. He can get forward actually, but he's probably more of a back four right back, if you put it that way. So I mean, I really like Jacob Murphy, and I think he could do. His biggest problem is confidence and feeling like he's going to be a big Newcastle player. And I think if they work on that, and I think other players have worked on it by texting him and encouraging him, and Dwight Gale's dropped him text, I think. So if they can all build his confidence up, I think Murphy could be he's a Premier League player. I saw him at Sheffield last year, Wednesday, and he was on the bench, came off the bench, and was their brightest player by a mile. So I just think it's his confidence, and he's had knockbacks. He's spoken himself about getting into the team and then playing, thinking he did all right, and then being dropped, and that's kind of difficult. That was under Rafa as well. But it's probably a big season. It's probably a make or break season for him. In that this is the time he's got to prove himself. He's been here since 2017, I think he signed, and it's probably this is his chance, and he's got to take it or not. He's always done okay when he's been on, and he's one of those like modern footballers who is really fit, athletic, can get up and down, has a bit of pace, and so he has got all those attributes. He just needs to have his head right. He's got the skills, and like the free kick against Wolves was brilliant, and I'd love to see it work for him at Newcastle.
Just a quick mention on Newcastle's strikers, obviously Callum Wilson, brilliant signing. I think a lot of people are just bemused. No one out of the top 4 or 5 came in to get him. He's proved his worth, 6 goals, fantastic. Hopefully he'll be fit for Chelsea. It's a bit touch and go. If he's not, who starts? Because they haven't really got a striker who's in a fine run of form. Carroll's still lacking that goal. Joe Linton isn't number 9 for all he's got the shirt. It's going to be it's a big question for Steve Bruce if Wilson indeed does miss the Chelsea game.
Yeah, I think you would probably put Joe Linton up front. I mean, Wilson, if he's tweaked his hamstring, even if it's a minor tweak, and we're led to believe it's not a really, really bad one. Coming back after 2 weeks, even with a tweaked hamstring, is a bit of a risk. So they're going to have to be really sure that he's okay to start him on Saturday, I would have thought. Unless it was just a pull and it was a little scare and it's not torn. But, you'd be wondering whether he will start. I would err on the side of not. I could be wrong. But, Joe Linton, you probably play Joe Linton. I don't think you'd play Andy Carroll. I think Andy Carroll, for a game where you're not going to have the ball, Chelsea are going to dominate those same old problems. You probably need someone dropping back, being mobile, getting around the pitch. And I don't think Andy Carroll's mobile enough to do that in a starting role. I think you could chuck him on last 15 and mix it up a bit and try and get something off Chelsea aerially. But I know Joe Linton's not a number 9, and he's meant to run the right channel or the left channel off a striker. We don't know where Joe Linton's best position is. We still don't know. But I would probably think that he would start as the centre forward.
It's nice to see Newcastle have a prolific goal scorer. I mean, you've covered Newcastle for a long time, and you've seen the likes of Martins and Cisse. But to get Wilson in, someone who's really hit the ground running. I mean, they've only had 64 shots in the Premier League so far this season. He's obviously scored 6, gone close a couple of times. You really do need a striker who, if he's in front of goal and he's got that one opportunity of maybe 2, 3 created in a game, that you'll bet quite a bit that he's going to score. And it's nice to have that confidence in a striker. No disrespect to the other options Steve Bruce has got, but it is nice, isn't it, to have that?
Yeah, it is.
Quality.
Yeah, and that's I think that's probably the fan base for everyone covering Newcastle and watching him. He's the bright spark. Yeah, you're exactly right. Confidence is the thing. You think, well, Callum Wilson, get him chances and he'll score. And it's nice to think that he's got 7 goals so far already. So he's already beaten the mark from last year. Shelvey was the top scorer last year in the Premier League with 6. He's already done that. He's probably looking for 15 goals minimum this year if he stays fit and it's not a long-term hamstring injury. So yeah, it's great to see that confidence, to have confidence in a striker. And if you look at the seasons where Newcastle have done well, Martin or Shearer obviously guaranteed, 15, 20 goals a season when he was fit. Barr, Remy, even in the recent history and in the Ashley era, they banged them in, and Newcastle had good seasons. Cisse as well. You need a striker getting 12, 13 goals minimum. And more if you're going to be in the top 10. You can't get top 10 with everyone chipping in 3 or 4 goals each. You need a reliable scorer, and they've probably got that in Callum Wilson now if they can get the ball to him enough and if they can get him shooting. Because at the minute he's scoring at the rate of once every time he gets he has a shot. It was a remarkable stat earlier in the season. He got 5 or 6 goals from 6 shots. So yeah, need him getting a few more shots on target and a bit more chaos created up front.
Do you think in January they'll go for a new striker? Because obviously we're sitting here and we're waiting to hear the news of whether Callum Wilson's going to be fit, how bad the injury is. We don't, like you say, believe it's too bad. But do you think they're going to dip into the market? I mean, there's been a couple of stories over the weekend, a couple of League One strikers linked, and then a striker who's got the most goals so far in Ligue 1 in France. So they're clearly scouting and looking around. But obviously then Dwight Gale's coming back, but then can you risk depending on Dwight Gale to be a backup given his injury? We all know he's talented, but that injury record is something to think about. So come January, what would you do if you were Steve Bruce? Would you be knocking on the door and saying, come on, we've got to get another striker in here?
I don't think it will be their priority. I think probably like was it Sumari that they were in for a couple of Januaries ago. I think they probably need like a beast dominant midfielder who's got a bit of everything, who can run all day and who's got a bit of pace and physicality. I think they're kind of lacking that at the minute. If you're going to spend like 20, 30 million, you probably need to get the equivalent of that player, even though he didn't want to come. Because Shelvey, maybe he doesn't get around the pitch as much. He's got a great passing range, but is he the killer in off the ball? Hayden's probably not creative enough. So if you can kind of spend your pot on a player who, if there's one in the market, I think they'd probably put their eggs in the basket if they've got 5-6 forwards now who they've got in there, even with Gale out and with Joe Linton not on the team. And then you've got the three, Saint-Maximin, Almiron, Fraser, and then Callum Wilson. So you're looking at you're already juggling like 6 or 7 players for the front 3-4 places. So I don't know if they would go for a striker again. I would say it's probably midfield, or even, there's players now that need to offload. Chronicle did a story the other day, Lee Ryder, with a multiple number of people. Was it 10 people out of contract in 2021? And there's a few of those that they're going to have to get rid of in January. You're going to have to get, bring a few million in for, Dwight Gale's fit. A championship side would want a Dwight Gale, scoring goals for them, and he could make the difference, to get promotion. So there are going to be deals that they need to do in January, and it's probably the priority is going to be getting those contracts and wages off now and raising a bit of money from the players that have done their job at Newcastle and probably going to move on, and they're not going to progress the club more in terms of getting it up the league. And you maybe just cash in, free the wages up, and then buy someone else and just try a different route to take a gamble somewhere else. You can't take gambles all the time, but there are a number of players in that Newcastle squad who you think maybe the club should be cashing in now, selling where they're not their peak, but while they've done their job, not really worthy of a new contract, and then rejigging it a bit. And that's a big job for Bruce in the scouting department next. I think there's a lot of senior players being given contracts by Bruce at Bruce's behest. Shelvey could have sold him for a load of money, but they've kept him. Matt Ritchie, is in that bracket as well. Now, once you've given that contract, you're either saying you can progress the club and you're going to be in my team, or you're protecting the player's value, and then the player will be sold for a higher value than if the contract was running down. And there's a lot of, I think Bruce in the next, until the summer, he's going to be evaluating a lot of players in that squad, and so will Lee Charnley and the bosses at the top, thinking, do we make some money out of these guys and try another route and try and make us better in another way, or not, or you keep them. And Steve Bruce likes that core of senior Englishy sort of homegrown native players.
Certainly going to be interesting to see what happens with especially those out of contract. The penultimate question then, before we get on to the final question, which many of you could probably guess it is on the takeover. I just want to ask you about pundits. We mentioned it earlier in the show. Obviously, like Robbie Savage, Chris Sutton. They've been very vocal over the past couple of weeks. Robbie Savage was in the Daily Mirror with his column, and he's been on 5 Live as well, trying to understand a bit about the situation at Newcastle. And I think what really frustrates fans is that accusation. We saw it with Mark Lawrence, and that Newcastle United fans are demanding Champions League football. And that's just not the case, is it? We all want that for the club, but we understand that's not going to happen right now. Are fans, do you think, misrepresented by national pundits?
Yeah, I think it's kind of one of these, and as a journalist, I try not to get into this, but there's kind of if you're gonna criticize anyone in the world of football, it usually is an enemy or someone you've never got on with in the past. Now, there's an element of chumminess about. If you've got a column to fill or you've got airspace to fill, it's much easier to be nice about someone and make an excuse for a manager than it is to actually say a bit of reality, to be constructive and be seen to be slightly critical. And there are journalists up here, Chronicle as well, who do the criticism thing fairly and constructively and can see faults and will point them out. But I think when you don't know the detail, and a lot of these pundits don't watch Newcastle at 90 minutes and don't know the detail, and are a little bit out of touch, then it's just easier to be nice about a manager and say Brucey's experienced, he knows what he's doing, and he does, but it doesn't absolve him from criticism and a question that he could be better. So yeah, I think they are represented. I think that there's a subtlety in this argument. Newcastle fans don't expect their team to be challenging or to be in the Champions League or to finish top 4 or top 6. But what they do think is that club has the ability to do that and has potential to do that. And there's a lot of clubs in the Premier League haven't got the potential to do that. But we know, having seen it happen and we know the club has the potential to do that. And that's what Newcastle fans are arguing for. They're saying, we're a big club. We're 52,000. 15 years ago, we were in the European Cup and in the UEFA Cup and in the Champions League. So we know it can be done. And the problem is, the further Newcastle are seen as a mediocre, mid-table, just avoid relegation type of club, the further the club's income falls, the further behind they fall to the elite. And money talks in football. And in the last 10 years, Newcastle have, on the pitch, you look at the stats, they were same as Liverpool 15 years ago, income-wise, same as Tottenham. And those clubs are now earning hundreds of millions of pounds more than Newcastle commercially in terms of playing in the Champions League, deals for shirt sponsorships, deals for wines, whatever. Man U got deals for everything. They've got an official everything. So they've fallen hundreds of millions behind in the last 10 years. And that's, Mike Ashley's tried a lot of things to change to change the football club and do it in the way he saw fit, because he didn't like the way football did business. But he's not kept the football club up in those areas, and that's 100% what's happened. And my biggest worry is whether that gap can ever be bridged. Now Newcastle going to have to get very lucky with signings, and the way they spend the money that they've got to bridge the gap. Leicester have done it, so it's not completely a hopeless case, because Leicester have been clever and they've something gelled there, and they're still building on it now, and they've got good managers to do that. So it's not a lost cause, but it's going to take a lot of luck to get back up there. So when Newcastle fans get hammered for wanting their club to be successful and to challenge in the top four, it's because they know it can be done, because they've got 50,000 and a massive fan base, and a history there which suggests that it can be done. Not that they expect it to be done, but it can be, with the right management, with the right people in charge, with the right investment.
One of the other ways they could get lucky is if this proposed takeover went through. Obviously, we all know the details of what's happened. I mean, from your point of view, is it dead in the water? Is it still alive in the background? What's your take on it?
I think the club will be taken over eventually. I think in the summer, the consortium buying the club massively underestimated the problem that piracy caused, with having the Saudis involved. The Premier League's a massive British export, UK export, tens of millions of pounds for the exchequer coming into the country because of that. And the Saudi regime allowed piracy to happen, meaning that a broadcaster, beIN Sports, lost a hell of a lot of revenue and a lot of money because of their piracy. And it's a geopolitical battle between countries, of course it is. But until that piracy thing's resolved, will that come? I wonder whether there could be room for a revival when the new international broadcast rights are renegotiated in the not next few months, but 6 months' time. Certainly within the next year there'll be another auction, and I don't know whether it'll be split up and Saudi Arabia can buy their own rights. That's unlikely. I think the Premier League don't want to do that. But I think the consortium underestimated the problem that was going to cause, and that should have been sorted quicker. They didn't realise how, even at governmental level, the government were going to be under pressure to have that sorted before the Premier League could approve that deal. Now, Newcastle, it's been written before that it's probably the last club worth taking over. It's someone, probably George, said unpolished diamond. It's the last unpolished diamond in the Premier League, with vast potential to transform, and also being a one-club city. So it is the club, if anyone's going to buy, that is worth buying. You're not just investing to be in the Premier League, you'd be investing to really do something and enthuse the city again. And it needs to happen. We all know it needs to happen. It needs to happen with a regime that we can be comfortable with. So if the Saudis are reforming and they're doing stuff in their country which modernizes it and makes it more acceptable to the political world and globally, then good. Keep doing that, and don't be at war and be ripping off a great British export and pirating it and turning a blind eye to it, which they did. Don't be doing that. Be part of the system, and if you're going to buy Newcastle, buy it as without controversies. Reform. They need to reform their. Women are locked up. Freedom campaigners or political campaigners are locked up in Saudi Arabia. That wasn't even part of the equation when it was turned down in the summer. So will it happen? I mean, they pulled out, and they pulled out because they couldn't get it through. Basically, they couldn't get that deal through, so they pulled out. Whether that means they're now not interested, I don't know. But if they're going to buy a club, and I think a state like Saudi Arabia, they bought the rights to the Grand Prix recently, and so they're hosting a Grand Prix next year, which in itself got scrutiny and was controversial. They're clearly looking at sport as a vehicle to make their regime more integrated in the world or more palatable. Some call it sports washing, but they're clearly still, with the Grand Prix rights, it's proven that they're clearly looking at sport as a way of spending their money and being part of the global community. Newcastle fans are just aren't massively interested in the politics of it all. They need to understand why the deal collapsed, and that was the piracy thing. They want a successful football club that's invested in. I can see the deal remaining on the table for. I mean, this is my opinion, not factual information. I can see the deal remaining on the table, and the players still having a determination to do it, and eventually, when stuff's sorted out behind the scenes, it actually happening. I think it's such a serious deal to be done, and I think there's no one else. I don't think Ashley wants to negotiate with anyone else. I think he wants that deal to remain on the table because Ashley wants to hand it over. I mean, for all his faults, I think he wants to hand it over to them because he believes they've got money to pour into the club. And I think one of our colleagues who's very much into sports politics tweeted the other week that Ashley's actually rebuffing other potential bidders and actually not entertaining their bids. So there clearly is something there where Mike Ashley knows the determination is there and knows their will is still there. So otherwise he'd be inviting other offers to get his 300 million. But it's a long-term thing, isn't it? It's not going to happen next week. It's not going to happen, end of the season probably. So it's just one of those things where it bubbles along.
What do you make of the two legal challenges? Obviously, we've got one where Mike Ashley's instructed to the top sporting barristers to act on his behalf and Newcastle's behalf in the dispute with the Premier League. Then we have this fan one as well. I mean, in your view, employing someone like Nick DeMarco to act on your behalf it's quite the step. But is it any more than kind of, just kind of not throwing your the toys out the pram, but can you see it actually heading into a court case or anything like that?
Obviously you read about DeMarco and he gets the results. He was involved in the Sheffield Wednesday decision recently where their points deduction was halved. So they will be looking for every little clause and weakness in the Premier League's case. However, you do. I mean, you look at the job adverts in sport, and you'll see that Premier League have got an absolute army of expert lawyers themselves, and that's before you get into, everyone in the Premier League being a shareholder and having their own say. They've got lawyers. They will presumably, they looked at this for 6 months, or it was on the table for 6 months, and there was a lot of chat with their rights holders and people behind the scenes, and even the governments were involved. And you'd expect the Premier League to think they've got a pretty watertight case for asking what they asked for. Even because, the dispute, it hasn't even gone to the test yet. So the Premier League, don't believe it's even gone to their own test yet. It hasn't failed their test. So there's an argument there whether it's failed the test because it hasn't reached it, because they wouldn't let it get that far, or whether it goes to the test and then it's failed. It hasn't even gone to the official Premier League test yet. So it's all a bit messy. And the Premier League will believe they've got a case and something's got to change. Something's got to give. They've got to admit that it's Saudi Arabian government money which is being spent at the end of the day, and they should just admit that. It's not. This is PIF, and one of the arguments, PIF is not the Saudi government and is not the royal, sponsored investment fund. It just appears nonsense on the face of it. The Crown Prince is the chairman of it. They're investing government money to move their economy away from oil and into other things. This is a state organization. It could be legally independent. It could be a legally independent entity. You could argue that in court, which people have, but it's still a state-sponsored thing. So there's that detail. So somehow lawyers have got to overcome, the Premier League have got to overcome, the bidders have got to overcome before the whole thing gets sorted out.
There we have it. Nothing's ever simple with Newcastle United, is it?
Yeah. It's not.
Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your view on the season thus far and the takeover saga.